Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to KRS TV. This is your boy Kenny, and this is a new episode of my new series, Tea and Scandals. I'd like to thank you for clicking on. And this episode is about the Prince of Motown, the King of R&B and Soul, Mr. Marvin Gaye. And yes, I did say the King of R&B and Soul, so there are no blurred lines when it comes to that statement. And I will have to go to say that Marvin Gaye was probably one of the greatest artists of all time. But even though he was such a great artist, he was a troubled man who never overcame his contradictions, nor his complications with his father, which led to his demise. Marvin Gaye was born April 2nd, 1939 in Washington, D.C. He's the second of 4 children. He also has 2 half-brothers, one Michael Cooper, which was a child that was conceived from a previous relationship of his mother's, and Antoine Carey Gaye, who was actually a child that his father conceived from one of his extramarital affairs. His father was a Pentecostal minister, and his mother was a domestic worker, and his mother was the breadwinner of the family. Marvin's family actually belonged to a Pentecostal / holiness denomination, and they went to a church called the House of God, and they grew up in church, and Mr. Gaye was very strict about his children finding activities within the church. And one of the things that Marvin did was singing. And pretty much they pretty much had a very strict way of living. They were not allowed to get into fights. They weren't allowed to play sports. They weren't allowed to cuss. And let's just say that Mr. Gaye was a very strict disciplinarian, and he was very high on discipline. The saying goes, spare the rod, spoil the child. Well, Mr. Marvin Sr. never spared the rod, especially when it came to Marvin. Marvin Jr. would accompany his father, because his father was a traveling preacher. So they would go to different churches where his father would preach, and Marvin Jr. would sing. And people would gravitate towards Marvin Jr. because he was pretty much like a child prodigy. And people saw his gift at an early age. And I think this started to plant the seeds of jealousy and envy between Marvin Sr. and Marvin Jr. Marvin Gaye will actually describe his father that living with his father was like living with a king, a very malicious, cruel, powerful king. And if you broke any of the rules of the house, you were disciplined physically. And let's just say that this was true for all of the Gaye children, but Marvin got it the most. And I think it was due to the fact that Marvin was a free spirit. And his father would say things like, "I don't know where you came from, boy. You ain't no kid of mine. You got the devil in you." When really the real irony was that Marvin was a free spirit, a person who didn't want nobody telling him what to do. He was someone that was a seeker, was a discoverer. And this was seen as bad, for Marvin Sr. So Marvin would get routine whippings, for everything he did. And let's just say this physical abuse started from age 7 all the way into his teenage years. And then to also add injury to it, was that, here was his father was seen as this very strong preacher. And he even said that his father's preaching definitely had an influence on him, because he said his father was a good preacher. But then at home, his father would wear women's clothes. Like, he would wear his mother's negligees, and he wasn't that he was just a cross-dresser. He was a flamboyant cross-dresser, and even people in the neighborhood, knew of his father's cross-dressing, which had a very deep effect on him, because even though he loved his father, he didn't respect him, and he didn't look up to him, and he kind of feared that some of these tendencies will rub off on him, which is why, you know, Marvin had a very strong masculine presence, you know, throughout his life. In high school, you know, Marvin Gaye would actually perform with different doo-wop groups. He went to Cardozo High School, and you know, to get away, you know, from his father, because, you know, in his teenage years, his father used to throw him out the house a lot. He decided to join the Navy, but again, Marvin was a free spirit, and we know that the military is very strict on discipline and order. So he pretty much faked, you know, mental illness, you know, and he was discharged from the Navy. When he came back, he started to work with this group called the Marquis, which was a doo-wop group. They ended up, you know, catching the eye of Bo Diddley, who actually, who pretty much had them signed to his subsidiary label. I think it was called OK Records, and they released a song called Wyatt Earp, which didn't do well. And eventually Marvin, you know, ended up back in DC, where he ran into Harvey Fuqua of the group The Moonglows. And Harvey Fuqua pretty much saw Marvin's potential, and Marvin at the time was underage, so Harvey Fuqua asked his mother and father, could, you know, Marvin travel with them, because by this time he combined the Marquis with the Moonglows, so they became the New Moonglows. And, you know, his father pretty much gave his okay, but his father really didn't want him to go. And pretty much what they did is that as the Moonglows, they traveled, you know, throughout the country performing, and they ended up in Detroit, where they performed at they pretty much were, I think they were at a Motown party, is where he finally met Berry Gordy for the first time. And at this time, you know, Marvin was not the lead singer of the Moonglows. He did lead a song, you know, with them, but he mainly was like more like a session musician. He played drums, and he also wanted to be a songwriter. So pretty much, you know, in the early part of his career, Marvin was more like a roadie and a session musician. And like by the time he came to Motown was still like an upstarting company. They had some hits on their roster, you know, from acts like the Marvelettes, Little Stevie Wonder, Smokey Robinson, The Miracles, and Mary Wells. And it was also around this time that, you know, Marvin Gaye, you know, developed a relationship with Berry Gordy's sister, Anna Gordy. Now, she was, you know, 17 years his junior, so she was a much older woman. But if you look at Anna, Anna was gorgeous, you know, so he definitely, excuse me, he definitely was physically attracted to her. But yet, her being the sister of the president of the label didn't hurt either. And they actually married in 1961, and they end up adopting a little boy, Marvin Gaye III. And in his early releases in Motown, you know, he wanted to be a crooner like Nat King Cole. And, you know, his first two albums were in that style, and they didn't sell because, you know, that style was no longer popular. But it goes to show that Marvin Gaye was a well-rounded musician. Anything you put in front of him, Marvin would perform it, and he would do it great. But it started to affect Marvin, because he started to see that other artists in the label were getting hits except for him. And him being a competitive person, he decided, okay, I'm gonna finally write a hit too. He also is credited as co-writing the song Beechwood 45789 for the Marvelettes. And he also wrote his first pop hit, Stubborn Kind of Fella, which really described him, because he was a person, as I said, was a free spirit. So he marched to his own tune, and he played his own drum. And Martha and the Vandellas are actually singing background on that song. but it was one of his first #1 hits, and it followed, with many others like Pride and Joy, Ain't It Peculiar, You're a Wonderful One, How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You, Hitchhike, and this literally turned, Marvin Gaye to a pop star and a sex symbol, because not only did he have great stage presence, but he had very good looks, which the women craved him. And he ended up becoming one of the biggest stars in Motown at this time. But even though he was, a big star, on Motown, and he had all of this success, he still struggled to get his father's approval, because he would lavish his father with nice gifts and things. His father would accept him, but his father would never acknowledge him or never really gave him his blessing. And the more he withheld giving Marvin that blessing, the more Marvin fought to get his father's approval. So this definitely just built more and more tension over the years between him and his father. And the thing is about Marvin is that Marvin was the kind of artist that loved being in the studio, but necessarily didn't like performing in public or in front of people. So he did suffer from performance anxiety, and he really fought with this whole sex symbol image that he became popular for. And to further exploit this sex appeal, Motown decided to team him up with female singers, to kind of play off, sexy guy, sexy girl singing love songs. Perfect formula. And they start him off, pairing him with Mary Wells. They had a hit with the song, What's the Matter with You, Baby. Also, they paired him with Kim Weston, who they had a very big hit with the song It Takes Two. But he finally struck gold when they actually collaborated him with Tammy Terrell. Now, I would have to say him and Tammy Terrell were like a magic combination. And I think mainly was because they both were kindred spirits. They were both good-looking people. They both were very competitive, and they both just had a lot of things in common. They both had the same competitive nature. They both understood each other, in a very deep way, and they had many hits together. The first one being Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and it led to songs like Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, Your Precious Love, and If This World Were Mine. And they really had great chemistry, and when you saw them, you would think they were in love. I mean, I even like watching their performances and seeing how she would always kind of play sassy or coy with him, in their performances. I thought it was magic. I just thought, like, wow, they really knew how to sell the song. And the thing is, they really did, they really became explosive on the charts. And it was also around this time, around 1967 and 68, where Marvin and Anna started having issues with their marriage. Excuse me. Mainly for the fact that, Anna was a much older woman, and, him being a sex symbol, there was always young girls throwing themselves at him. So she constantly had to deal with, issues of infidelity. And also, this sparked a lot of jealousy because of the fact that she was a much older woman, and yet, these younger girls, were going after her husband. And also, in 1968, Marvin, released the track I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which was a remake of the hit that was done by Gladys Knight and the Pips earlier. But when Marvin did it, it became a totally different song. And it became a bigger hit for Marvin than it was for Gladys Knight and the Pips. It went #1 and it sold 5 million copies, making it the highest selling single in Motown history. So, Marvin is like literally on the rise. He has these hits with Tammy Terrell. He also has, you know, this big solo success, you know, with I Heard It Through the Grapevine, as well as other things he's done. But it was within 1967 where things started to fall apart, and one being that in 1967, while performing at a college in Farmville, Virginia, Tammy Terrell collapsed in his arms while they were performing, and sadly, you know, they found out that she had a brain tumor, and even though she went back to work a little after that event, she never fully recovered. So for 3 years she struggled, had multiple surgeries, and she ended up dying in 1970 at the age of 24. And this, I think, really broke Marvin, you know, to the core, because this was a person that he bonded with, and they said they had more like a brother and sister relationship. It was completely platonic, but Tammy's death really affected him, and personally, I don't think he ever got over, you know, Tammy's death. And he didn't perform for about 3 years. You know, he pretty much stayed in his house, barely went out anywhere, and he just went into a deep depression. But before, you know, Tammy's death, he still had, you know, some songs that he released, and he even co-wrote 2 hits for the originals, Baby I'm For Real and The Bells. And I remember Baby I'm For Real, After 7 redid that song, and I never knew that, you know, Marvin Gaye actually produced and co-wrote on that song. So I thought that was rather cool. But then now I listen to it, I definitely hear Marvin in that song in a way. So that was pretty amazing. So here it is, you know, after Tammy's death, he literally hit rock bottom. He really wasn't, you know, doing nothing as far as television performances or anything. He pretty much just stayed home. But it was around 1971 that he started to work on, I would say, probably one of his best projects to date, which is the album What's Going On. And, you know, What's Going On, I think, had a collective of things that made that album what it was. One, Tammy Terrell's death. One, his brother Frankie was in the Vietnam War and was sending him letters telling him of all the craziness and devastation that he was seeing over there. And then you also have, you know, the aftermath of the deaths of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And then you have a lot of civil and social unrest in America, like the shootings at Kent University and the riots that were even breaking out in Detroit at that time. And Marvin really honed all of those things and put it into a beautiful piece of work. Like, he took that pain and he made it beautiful. And here was Marvin presented What's Going On to Berry Gordy, but Berry Gordy was dead set against releasing it because he said that it went against his image, and Motown at this time was known for being the sound of America. And here it is, you have Marvin Gaye, who's putting out this protest and socially aware type of music that Motown was unpopular for. And let's just say things really got heated between Marvin Gaye and Berry Gordy at this time, and even at times it even got physical between them. So you know, eventually you know, Berry decided to release it, but he released it with little fanfare because he thought it wasn't going to go anywhere. But What's Going On reached #1. You know, other songs that were on the album were Mercy Mercy Me, The Ecology, and Inner City Blues. What's Going On received 2 Grammy nominations. So this really was a game changer, you know, for Motown. And Marvin was probably the first artist to break away from the production team of Motown, because he self-produced What's Going On and it became a hit. So he was one of the first artists to break away from the production team and was able to write and produce his own material. Another star that was able to break away from the production team was Stevie Wonder, within the same decade, but Marvin was the first. So when it came to him getting a new deal with Motown, they pretty much gave him a $1 million advance, and they gave him, he was able to control his own production and ended up getting his own studio. So let's just say Marvin knew how to work things as far as getting what he wanted out of the label. But then we definitely still see that it's this kindred spirit, that who he was, that he was an artist that was going to be who he was going to be himself, and regardless of what was popular at the time, he was going to follow his own path. And this also led to him doing the musical score to the movie Troubled Man, and which also described Marvin, because he was definitely troubled on the inside, because even though he was loved, by artists, even though he was loved by audiences around the world, he still didn't get the recognition that he wanted from his father. And then he also struggled with loving himself due to his, many bouts of depression. After this, Marvin, along with Anna and Marvin III, moved to LA in 1972. He pretty much got caught up in the LA scene, because LA is prevalent, with drugs. So he definitely got caught up in cocaine and, popping pills and many other exploits that, the City of Angels had to offer. In 1973, he began to work on the album Let's Get It On. The song Let's Get It On, he co-wrote with Ed Townsend. And it was at these sessions where he met this 16-year-old named Janice Hunter. And let's just say him and Janice had instant chemistry, but she was only 16 at the time and he was much older. And it's kind of funny because, like, with Anna was pretty much a much older woman. And I think one thing that attracted him to Anna was that she reminded him of his mom, because he was very close with his mother. Even when he was a child and he would get these vicious beatings from his father, his mother would shield him and protect him. So he always looked up to his mother, and it was his mother who encouraged him to follow his dreams. But later on in his life, he now had an affection for a girl who was much younger than him. And Let's Get It On became a hit album. Another song that was on this album was, Come Get to This and If I Should Die Tonight. I mean, it was a very, big album, and it definitely was an album where Marvin let go of all of his inhibitions and just let himself, be free with his sexuality and be free with his expression of sexuality. So let's just say him and Janice definitely, they definitely had an affair while he was still married to Anna, and their affair was definitely, reeked with, drugs and alcohol. And pretty much after him and Anna divorced, that's when he had married Jan. And let's just say his relationship with Janice was totally different, because here it is, Anna was a very strong woman. So, and even though when they would have their verbal and physical spats with each other, she wasn't a pushover, and she was a person that stood her ground. Whereas Jan, who was a much younger woman, Marvin had more control over it, and he would push her on to other men. And it wasn't until she had relations with Frankly Beverly of Frankly Beverly and the Maze, and also had an affair with Teddy Pendergrass, who was one of his rivals, in R&B, that it took a very dark turn, and she even talks about this in her memoirs, where Marvin came at her with a knife, threatening to kill her. And, he even told her that, I want you to do something so I can kill you and then I can do myself. When she realized that, Marvin not only was becoming very sadistic and, somewhat of a masochist, is when she decided to get away from him. They were married literally for only 2 years, but within that time they had 2 children, Nona Gaye and his son Frankie. So also, after Let's Get It On, he released the Marvin Gaye live album, which had the big smash Distant Lover. He also released a song, he also released the album I Want You, which the title became a big hit. And also another song that I love from that album is After the Dance. Definitely, it's like everything he did just had this very melodic and somewhat of an operatic tone to it, and he just made it sexy and he made it smooth, and that's what I loved about Marvin's sound. He also released the album live at the London Palladium, which was also a very big hit. And also after his another thing that happened, as far as his marriage with Anna Gordy, after they divorced, he released the album called Here My Dear to help pay for alimony payments, following the divorce. And let's just say the album went nowhere, but it just goes to show what kind of artist Marvin was, that anything that he was feeling or anything that he was dealing with, he would put it to music, which is a representation of a true artist. But during this time, Marvin was really deep into, drugs, and after his relationship with Janice fell apart, him and his son, moved to Maui, Hawaii, where he was pretty much living in a bread truck, pretty much, living as a hobo. And it was around this time that he, and then one of the reasons why he ran was because, one, he owed alimony to Anna, and he owed the IRS about $4.5 million, so they pretty much confiscated his house and all of his, some of his belongings, and he kind of went into hiding. But then, he accepted this a European tour because it would get him out the US, of course. And while he was there, he was supposed to perform for Princess Margaret. And he literally, said that he already agreed to do this concert, but then decided, like, at the last minute, I'm just not feeling it, I'm not coming. And she got really pissed off, and the situation got back to Berry Gordy at Motown, and he told Marvin Gaye that you don't turn up your nose at royalty, so if you either do this concert or you're finished, you're done. So Marvin went ahead and did the concert, but by the time Marvin got there, she had already left. And Marvin was famous for saying that she only had to wait 15 minutes. I mean, it just goes to show you how far gone his life had become as far as his drug use and as far as his business. And pretty much after that performance, after the European tour, he decided to stay in London, to, get away from, Motown, the IRS, his ex-wives. And he really just, was living like a squatter in London with his son, dealing with prostitutes in and out, and was pretty much living in utter filth. And it was around this time that he actually met up with Freddie Cozart. And Freddie Cozart was known as a very big R&B fan. He was also a fight promoter. He reached out to Marvin and wanted to help Marvin to get back on his feet, so he joined Marvin in Belgium with his family. And Freddie let him know that when you get to Belgium, ain't gonna be no more of this nightlife, ain't gonna be no more of these drugs. I want you to get back to your craft, and I want you to become your best self. And while he was in Belgium, he wasn't on drugs. He started exercising. He was going to church. And he really started to build his life up again. And also around this time, there was an album that was released by Motown. Thing was called Love of a Lifetime, which was kind of like a depiction of, you know, of the angel versus the devil. And Marvin was actually working on this project, but it was unfinished. And, you know, Motown got some of the music, and they just rushed and put out the album without Martin's consent. Marvin was so irate with it that he pretty much said that I'm through, because you know, this was like releasing a Picasso unfinished. So from that point on, he vowed that he would never perform with Motown ever again, and that Motown was history to him. And while he was in Belgium, he actually got connected with CBS, Larkin Arnold, who wanted to sign him, you know, with CBS, because Marvin had decided he was no longer going to perform with Motown. But Marvin pretty much told him that, you know, you see this IRS bill, you see the situation with Motown, and you also see the situation with my ex-wives. Make that go away, and yeah, I'll sign with you guys. So CBS actually settled everything with Motown and also the IRS. And out of this, and his first recording under CBS Records was his album Midnight Love, which actually had one of the biggest hits of his career, Sexual Healing. Sexual Healing would go on to win 2 Grammys for Best Male R&B Performance and also Best Instrumental R&B Song. And this literally put Marvin Gaye back into the mainstream like ever before. It was like as if Martin had another rebirth, and he had this big comeback, and he literally had the world in the palm of his hand. Some of his last performances, which were very big performances, was he performed at the Lakers All-Star Game in 1983, where he sung the Star Spangled Banner. And the way he did the Star Spangled Banner was like no other. Like he literally made the Star Spangled Banner soulful. And I have to say, I've never to this day have seen the Star Spangled Banner perform that way. So it goes to show you the type of artist and the type of creative being Marvin Gaye really was. And another one of his last performances was his performance at the Motown 25 event, where, you know, all the artists from Motown came back, you know, to celebrate 25 years of Motown. And I recently watched this performance, and it nearly moved me to tears, because you can kind of see in Marvin's eyes that he was just tired, that he was just wore down. And he also, after that, he ended up going on tour with the Sexual Healing Tour. The tour started off good, but after a while, the same hangers-on, the drugs, all of the negative elements were coming back. And towards the end of the tour, he was a complete wreck, you know. And after the tour, due to all of his financial problems and his struggle with cocaine addiction, he ended up moving back in the house with his parents, which definitely came ahead on April 1st, 1984. What happened was that Marvin Sr. got into this verbal fight with Marvin's mother. Marvin steps in to defend his mother, which led to him and his father having this physical fight. Now, Marvin, as well as his siblings, knew when they were children the kind of man Marvin Sr. was, because he constantly told them, I brought you in this world and I can take you out. And you know, Marvin's siblings said he said that all the time when we were kids, and we knew he meant it. So we knew that we were never to rise up against him. But that day, Marvin physically attacked his father, which led his father to get the gun that Marvin had gave him. And he took that gun and went into Marvin's room and shot him twice. once in the heart and once in the shoulder. And, you know, Marvin was pronounced dead on his way to the hospital. And it was a day before his 45th birthday, you know, and the sad thing about it was that people at first thought it was a joke because it happened on April Fool's Day. Even Smokey Robinson couldn't believe it, who was one of his closest friends. He literally pulled over his car and called Anna Gordy to confirm it, and she confirmed that, yeah, it's true, his father shot him. And pretty much we get all of these different reports where, you know, Marvin knew by doing this that his father would kill him, because Marvin, towards the end of his life, was very suicidal. Like, they even talked about that he tried to throw himself out of a car while they were driving on the highway. And even when he was with Jan, he would have bouts where he would tell Jan, I'm gonna kill me, you and the kids. And so he definitely had this suicidal tendency because he could never resolve his own contradictions as far as, you know, his spirituality versus his sexuality. And then also the fact that he never got the love and acceptance that he always craved from his own father. So this led him into a real deep depression, and it led him to suicidal tendencies. So once this whole thing happened, a lot of people were like, wow, that's how he did it. Because he said, by doing this, I can free Mom and I can make him, you know, the bad guy. Because after that happened, you know, Marvin Sr. lost his family forever. You know, Marvin's mother filed for divorce, and he was pretty much ostracized from the family, and he died alone in a nursing home in 1998. So, sadly, you know, 2 people died on that day. Marvin's father as well as Marvin Jr. But Marvin Gaye's legacy has lived on, you know, and many other talents that followed him, such as Maxwell, R. Kelly, Joe. So many, you know, so many artists have benefited off of Marvin's gift and his contribution, you know, to music. And even to this day, you know, Marvin Gaye is still resonant, you know, within music, as well as within society, because what's going on is still prevalent now as it was then. It's like Marvin really foresaw all of the turmoil and problems within America, and he was calling for a change. He was calling for a revolution. And let's just say what's going on is still the soundtrack of the current environment we live in now, with social unrest, police brutality, and racial tensions that we are now facing in this country. So the question still is, what's going on? You know, what can we do and how can we make things better? Because that is something that Marvin really stressed, that he wanted to help, you know, people heal, and he wanted his music to awaken the souls of men. So that's what I have. If you know, feel free to get in those comments and let me know your thoughts about this, or let me know some of your favorite Marvin Gaye songs. You know, I'd definitely love to hear from you. But subscribe to my channel. Click that bell so you get notifications every time I drop a video. Also follow me on all of my social platforms. I have them all listed in the description box. Also like this video, comment on this video, and share this video. And I will be back with another episode of Tea and Scandals. So until next time, everybody, take care.